"Old Leech, get out! We don't have space for you," my daughter-in-law shrieked, her hand slamming the doorframe so hard the glass rattled. My suitcase was ripped from my grip and thrown onto the driveway, bursting open as clothes spilled across the dirt. A broom handle shoved against my chest, forcing me back. What had I done to deserve this fury? Why was I being exiled like a criminal from my own sanctuary? And what was she so desperate to hide that she would humiliate me so savagely? If you want to know what happens next, stay with me until the end of the video. And if you still believe deep in your heart that God is always watching over you, silently arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment saying Amen below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write those words, a blessing may quietly enter your life. I still remember the sound of her voice that morning, sharp and cutting, echoing through the halls of the place I had once called my sanctuary. "Why is that old parasite here? We don't have room for you." It wasn't a stranger yelling. It was Marissa, my daughter-in-law, standing tall on the front steps of my Cape May beach house, as if she owned every nail and brick of it. I froze on the gravel driveway, my car keys trembling in my hand. For a moment, I wondered if I had driven to the wrong address. But no, this was my home. I had built it with my own hands and my own sacrifices, and I had come here every summer for 2 decades. That June morning of 2023, I expected peace. Cape May was just waking up to another tourist season, flags already waving from porches, neighbors trimming hedges in preparation for the 4th of July. I came early to beat the summer rush, to sit on my porch and listen to the gulls cry while the ocean breeze carried in the smell of salt and sand. But peace was the last thing waiting for me. Instead, the driveway was clogged with 3 cars I didn't recognize. Music pounded from my living room so loudly that the windows shook. My garden, the one I had tended for years, where red geraniums bloomed in neat rows, was trampled flat, littered with soda cans and crumpled chip bags. Children I had never met were shrieking across my deck, kicking a soccer ball against the flower pots I had cared for with my own hands. It felt as though I had stumbled into a stranger's house party, but this was my house, my refuge. My husband had died when I was 50, and every board of this place had been nailed down with the money I earned sewing other people's clothes. Every wall was painted with my own brush strokes. Every tree out front was planted by me and my son Daniel, back when he still called me Mom with warmth in his voice. And now Marissa stood in the doorway, arms crossed, wearing the apron I had embroidered 10 years ago as if it were hers. She looked at me with the same cold disdain I had seen in her eyes at countless family dinners, though she usually hid it when others were around. Today, she wasn't hiding anything. Marissa," I managed to say, my throat tightening. "I didn't know you were here. This is my house. I've been coming here every summer for 20 years. She laughed, a short, cruel laugh that sliced through me. "Oh, please. Dan said we could use the house as long as we wanted. We're actually doing something useful here. You just come to complain and ruin family plans." Alu. Behind her, bodies filled the hallway, her sister Vanessa in a tank top with a phone glued to her hand, her mother Dolores smirking as though I were some uninvited guest, even a man in a Hawaiian shirt who must have been her uncle. More faces appeared, strangers in my kitchen, strangers sitting on my furniture, strangers holding my coffee mugs. I counted at least 7 of them, and not one looked embarrassed. Dolores, her mother, gave me a once-over, her mouth curling in mockery. "So this is the famous mother-in-law you're always talking about?" I expected someone more impressive. Laughter rippled behind her, soft and poisonous. I felt the burn of humiliation creep up my cheeks. 70 years old, standing there in my travel clothes, being laughed at like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. My voice shook as I asked, "Where's Dan?" Marissa tilted her chin upward, unbothered. "Working, like always. Unlike you, he has real responsibilities. Look, Helen, the rooms are full, the kitchen's taken, and honestly, your presence would only create unnecessary tension. You should probably head back to the city." For a moment, I could barely breathe. The air felt thick, pressing in on me. She wasn't just suggesting I come back later. She was telling me to leave, banishing me from the very house I had built after losing my husband. "This house is mine," I whispered. But even to my own ears, my voice sounded faint. "I pay the taxes. "That's enough," she cut in, raising her voice. "Always the same story. You paid, you built, you sacrificed. Dan is your son. What's yours is his, and what's his is mine. That's how families work." The children stopped playing. Every eye turned toward me. They were waiting, almost hoping, for me to collapse, to shout, to prove myself the bitter old woman Marissa had painted me to be. My heart thudded, but something deep inside me hardened. A teenage girl, Vanessa's daughter, sauntered forward and sneered. "Why don't you just go stay in a hotel? Aunt Marissa's right. There's no space for you here." I forced a smile, the kind that hurts your cheeks because it hides more than it shows. "It's fine, dear. I understand perfectly." Marissa smirked in triumph, certain she had won. Dolores clapped her daughter on the shoulder like she was proud of her. The others looked relieved, as if they had fended off an invader, but they had no idea. No idea that I wasn't just some tired old woman they could bully into silence. They hadn't seen me when I was young, when I clawed my way out of poverty one seam, one stitch, one saved dollar at a time. They hadn't seen me carry bricks for this house, paint walls with blistered hands, plant trees with a heart full of hope. I turned slowly, my steps measured, my back straight. I refused to let them see me break. With every step toward my car, I told myself the same thing over and over. This is not the end. This is the beginning. As the gulls wheeled above and the ocean roared just beyond the dunes, I knew one thing for certain. Marissa had declared war on me, and she had no idea the kind of woman she had just provoked. When I left the house that morning, I didn't drive far. My hands shook too much on the wheel to trust myself on the open road, so I pulled into the small parking lot near the lighthouse at Cape May Point. I sat there for nearly an hour, staring at the waves rolling in, trying to understand what had just happened. My own daughter-in-law had stood in the doorway of my house, the house I built, the house I paid for, the house I nurtured like a child, and she had told me I didn't belong there. Worse, she had done it with the kind of confidence that suggested she truly believed it. I thought about calling Dan, but my fingers couldn't dial. A voice in my head whispered, "What if he already knows? What if he agrees with her?" That possibility was more painful than Marissa's insults. I wasn't ready to hear my son's betrayal spoken aloud. By mid-afternoon, the summer sun was blazing. Families passed me with coolers and beach umbrellas, kids in swimsuits tugging at their parents' hands. Laughter floated through the air. Cape May was alive with summer joy, while my heart felt like it was locked in winter. Finally, I drove into town and checked into the Sand Dune Inn, a modest little hotel just a few blocks from the beach. The woman at the desk greeted me with a smile, unaware that I was carrying the weight of humiliation in every step. The room smelled faintly of sunscreen and cleaning supplies, and the bedspread was patterned with seashells. It was the kind of place I might have enjoyed if I were here as a tourist. But tonight, it felt like exile. I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, the ceiling fan spinning shadows on the walls. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marissa's smirk, Dolores's disdain, Vanessa's phone raised to capture her victory. I heard that cruel laugh again, the one that told me I was insignificant. By dawn, I had made up my mind. I would go back. I needed to speak to Dan, face to face. I needed to hear from his own lips what he thought about all this. So at 8 o'clock sharp, I pulled into my driveway again. My heart thudded against my ribs. I rang the bell of my own house like a stranger. Vanessa answered, still in her pajamas, hair messy, irritation written all over her face. "What do you want now?" she snapped. I swallowed hard. "Good morning. I've come to collect some personal belongings, and I need to talk to Marissa." "She's sleeping," Vanessa muttered it. "And your stuff? It's in the garage. We bagged it up so it wouldn't be in the way." Bagged it up. My possessions, clothes I had folded carefully, books I had collected for years, the photographs of my late husband all crammed into garbage bags like unwanted clutter. I brushed past her, ignoring her protests. This was still my home. What I saw inside nearly broke me. The living room, once my pride with its wicker chairs and hand-sewn curtains, looked like a college dorm after a wild party. Clothes were strewn across the sofa, inflatable mattresses filled the floor, fast food wrappers piled on the coffee table. The smell of stale smoke and greasy food clung to the air. When I reached the kitchen, I stopped cold. My stove, which I had scrubbed spotless after every meal, was caked with burnt grease. The sink overflowed with dirty dishes, some already growing mold. My pots, my beloved set of stainless steel pots that had cost me nearly a year of scrimping and saving, were scorched and stained. "Where are my china plates?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Vanessa shrugged. "Some broke. The kids were playing. Megan said they were old anyway. We did you a favor by cleaning out stuff you don't use." My chest tightened. Those plates weren't just dishes. They were treasures I had collected one by one, saved for special holidays. They held memories of birthdays and Christmas dinners, of laughter around the table with Dan when he was a boy. Now they were gone, shattered carelessly, dismissed as old. I forced myself upstairs, hoping against hope that my bedroom, my sanctuary, had been spared. But the sight that greeted me there made me stumble. Dolores was standing in front of my closet, her hands on my blouses as if they belonged to her. 2 children I didn't know were asleep in my bed, my pillows stained, my quilt tossed aside. My clothes were stuffed into black garbage bags on the floor. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaking. "This is my room." Dolores turned, lips curling. "Oh, don't worry, dear. I'm taking care of everything. I even organized your clothes into bags so they won't wrinkle. See? We're helping you." Helping me. My personal belongings shoved away, my bed occupied by strangers, my sanctuary reduced to chaos, and she dared to call it helping. I pressed a hand against the doorframe to steady myself. "Ma'am, I need those children out of my bed." "Your bed?" she scoffed. "Megan told me you don't use this room anymore. The kids need it more than you." I couldn't breathe. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. In my own house, I was treated as an intruder. I stumbled downstairs, every step heavier than the last, until I found Marissa on the terrace. She was sipping coffee from my favorite mug, wearing my robe, speaking on the phone. "Yes, Mom," she was saying, her voice light with amusement. "The house is beautiful. Don't worry, I've already handled everything. The mother-in-law understands now." She laughed, a sound like nails scratching glass. When she saw me, she hung up, annoyance flashing across her face. "What are you doing here so early? I thought we made it clear there's no room for you." I clenched my fists, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Marissa, this house is legally mine. I pay the taxes. I have the deed. Dan has no right to give you permission to use it without asking me." She rolled her eyes. "Don't start with your legal drama. Dan is your son. Children inherit from their parents. What's his is mine. That's normal." "Happy?" I snapped, gesturing toward the mess. "You've destroyed my kitchen. You've broken my plates. You've bagged my clothes like trash." "Well, you had a lot of old junk," she said coolly. "We did you a favor by cleaning up. Honestly, Helen, you should thank us." Her words hit harder than a slap. This wasn't just disrespect. This was erasure. She was erasing my presence, my memories, my worth. "Where is Dan?" I demanded one last time. "Working," she said. "And don't worry, he's on board with all of this. It was his idea, actually. He said, it's time for this house to be used productively, instead of sitting empty, waiting for your occasional visits." My heart splintered. That couldn't be true. My son, the boy who once hugged me on this very porch and said, "Mom, you're the strongest woman I know," he wouldn't have betrayed me like this. But if it wasn't true, why wasn't he here? Why wasn't he stopping her? I stood as tall as I could, though my body trembled. "You have until tomorrow to get your family out of my house. This ends now." Marissa laughed, cruel and sharp. "Or what? You'll call the police? You'll sue your own son? Don't be ridiculous. You can't do anything against us. We're family." Family. She dared to call this betrayal family. I smiled then, a slow, deliberate smile that came from a place far deeper than anger. "You're right, Marissa. We are family. And you'll soon see what that really means." I turned and walked out, the sound of her laughter chasing me down the driveway. But inside me, something was shifting. A cold, focused rage was rising. Not the kind that screams and lashes out, but the kind that plans, that calculates, that waits for the right moment. They thought I was a helpless old woman. They thought I would cry, give up, retreat, but they didn't know me. They didn't know Helen Whitaker. I didn't leave Cape May after that second humiliation. Something inside me refused to run. I booked another night at the Sand Dune Inn, but I knew I couldn't spend the summer hiding in that seashell-patterned room while strangers desecrated the place I had poured my soul into. That night, as fireworks burst somewhere down the coast in preparation for the 4th of July, I sat at the small desk in my hotel room and made a plan. I would return to the house the next morning, not to argue, not to beg, but to gather evidence. If I was going to fight Marissa, I would do it with facts, not emotions. At 6 the next morning, I drove back. The air was crisp, the gulls already circling, the boardwalk filling with early joggers. I carried a small purse with my phone, a notebook, and a determination I hadn't felt in years. When I rang the bell this time, Vanessa opened the door, yawning, and barely looked at me before letting me in. "Whatever," she muttered. "Just don't wake the baby." And? I moved quickly, heading straight upstairs. I told myself I was only there to grab my medication from the bathroom, but what I really wanted was to see the damage with my own eyes and to check on something very important. The bedroom was worse than before. My vanity mirror had been scratched with something sharp. My drawers were filled with other people's clothes. My bathtub, the one I had saved for years to install, was stained with dark streaks from hair dye. My embroidered towels were piled on the floor, used and filthy. My throat tightened as I opened the closet. At first glance, it looked the same, my dresses stuffed into bags, shoes scattered, but I knew where to look. Behind the closet's back panel was a small, hidden compartment. I had built it myself years ago, a place for the things that mattered most. Property documents, my late husband's watch, my mother's pearl earrings, and the silver coins I had collected since childhood. The panel was slightly ajar. My heart stopped. I pulled it open with trembling hands. The sight inside made my knees nearly buckle. The compartment had been ransacked. My documents were scattered, some wrinkled, others on the floor. The pearl earrings were gone, the gold watch gone, the silver coins gone. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Papers that weren't mine. I picked them up, my hands shaking so badly I could hardly read the words. They were legal documents. A property transfer request, listing my beach house in Cape May, with Daniel's name typed neatly as the recipient. The reason cited for transfer: owner's advanced age and diminished mental capacity. I gasped. My eyes raced over the words again, desperate to find some mistake. But there it was, in black and white. A request to declare me mentally incompetent. At the bottom was a medical report. I blinked hard, trying to steady my vision. According to the report, I had been examined and diagnosed with early-stage senile dementia. The signature at the bottom was from a doctor I had never even heard of, from some cheap clinic 2 counties over. My breath came in short bursts. My own son and daughter-in-law were plotting to steal my house not by force but by law. They were building a case to strip me of my rights, to turn me into nothing more than a senile old woman in the eyes of the court. A note scribbled in Marissa's handwriting sat at the corner of the appraisal form. "With this money, we can buy a bigger place and send the kids to private school. Just need Dan to sign. And make sure the old lady doesn't cause trouble." The old lady. That's all I was to her. Not a woman who had raised her husband. Not the person who had built the very walls around her. Just the old lady. I stuffed the documents into my purse, my fingers clumsy with rage. I snapped photos of everything with my phone. The damage, the mess, the missing valuables. My stomach churned as I realized how deep this went. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment invasion. This was planned, calculated. They had already spoken to lawyers, already bribed a doctor, already envisioned how they would spend the money once they sold my house. I staggered to the window, needing air. On the deck below I saw them, Marissa and Dolores laughing over coffee, Vanessa snapping selfies in my hammock, children running wild across my lawn, crushing flowers I had planted with my own hands. My house had become a carnival, and I was the ghost haunting its edges. But I was no ghost. Not yet. I turned from the window, clutching the documents to my chest. The humiliation I had felt these past days was nothing compared to the cold, sharp fury settling over me now. This wasn't just about family disrespect anymore. This was fraud, theft, betrayal in its purest form. And if Marissa thought I was too old, too weak, too senile to fight back, she was about to learn otherwise. I didn't leave quietly. On my way out, I paused in the kitchen where Marissa was laughing into her phone. She hung up when she saw me, her smile slipping. "What are you doing snooping around upstairs?" she demanded. I slipped my purse over my shoulder, my eyes never leaving hers. "You'll find out soon enough." Her brow furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you've underestimated me," I said softly. "And that will be the most expensive mistake of your life." And I walked out before she could respond, the screen door slamming shut behind me. Back in my hotel room, I spread the papers out across the bedspread. My hands no longer trembled. They steadied with every document I arranged, every note I scribbled in my notebook. I listed everything I had lost: the jewelry, the coins, the china plates, the dignity of my own bed. I documented every insult, every violation, every shred of proof that this wasn't just family conflict. It was a crime. I thought of Dan, my son, the boy I had raised alone after his father died, the boy I had fed when I could barely feed myself, the boy who once told me, "Mom, you can do anything." And now he was trying to take away the very thing I had built to prove that I could. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I had cried enough. Now was the time for action. I pulled out my phone and called the one man I trusted with money matters. Alan Pierce, the manager at the local bank branch. He had known me for years, respected me for my discipline. When his calm voice answered, I nearly sobbed with relief. "Alan," I said, forcing my voice steady, "I need an appointment today. It's urgent, and I need you to prepare something for me, a statement confirming that I am fully capable of managing my own finances." He paused, immediately sensing the weight behind my words. "Of course, Helen. Come by at noon, we'll get everything in writing." When I hung up, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The battlefield had shifted. This was no longer a fight inside my house. It was moving into the courts, the banks, the world of documents and signatures. And in that world, I wasn't weak. I had spent 70 years mastering discipline, paperwork, finances. I had saved every penny for decades. I knew how to fight in that arena. As I gathered the papers back into my purse, I caught my reflection in the mirror above the desk. For the first time in days, I didn't see a humiliated old woman. I saw a soldier putting on her armor. That evening, I sat on the balcony of my hotel, watching the sunset bleed across the Atlantic. Families strolled below, laughing, carrying ice cream cones. Somewhere down the beach, music played, and I could hear children squealing with delight. Life went on, as if my world hadn't been turned upside down. But I knew something they didn't. War had been declared, and I wasn't about to lose. At noon the next day, I walked into the Cape May courthouse branch of the bank, where I had been a customer for nearly 2 decades. The building itself was nothing remarkable, red brick with white trim, a flag fluttering out front, but to me it felt like the front lines of a battle. I had never been so aware of the weight of a purse on my shoulder, filled with the evidence of my own family's betrayal. Alan Pierce was waiting for me, tall, silver-haired, with glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up from his desk as I entered his office. His face softened the moment he saw me. "Helen," he said, rising to shake my hand firmly. "You look troubled. Sit down. Tell me what's going on." I sank into the chair across from him and for the first time in days allowed myself to breathe a little easier. Alan had known me long enough to recognize the difference between rumor and reality. If I told him what had happened, he wouldn't dismiss it as exaggeration. So I laid it all out: the invasion of my house, Marissa's insults, the mess, the missing valuables. And finally, I slid the forged medical report and the property transfer request across his desk. Alan adjusted his glasses and read silently. When he finished, he set the papers down slowly, his jaw tightening. "Helen, this is serious, very serious." "I know," I whispered. He looked me straight in the eyes. "First of all, you are perfectly capable of managing your finances. I've worked with you for 15 years. Your accounts are always in order, your savings steady, your investments conservative and reliable. The idea that you are mentally incompetent is absurd." Tears threatened, but I blinked them back. "Thank you, Alan." He leaned back in his chair. "Let's take this one step at a time. Do you know exactly what you have in your accounts right now?" "Yes, but I need confirmation." I've always kept my savings separate, even after paying off the house. Every month, $300 from my pension, plus what I earn sewing, goes straight into savings. I need to know what I truly have. Alan typed into his computer, then turned the monitor toward me. Here's the breakdown. 80, 7,000 in your savings account, 23,000 in CDs, 12,000 in checking. That's a total of $122,000, MC. I exhaled slowly, relief flooding through me. For years, I had squirreled away every dollar, never imagining I would need it for something like this. I thought it might someday pay for medical care or funeral expenses. Instead, it was going to fund a war. Alan nodded toward the documents on his desk. I'll prepare an official statement from the bank confirming that you are fully capable of handling your finances. That should counter any claims of incompetence. But Helen, you'll need more than that. You'll need a good lawyer, someone who knows how to handle family fraud cases. Do you know anyone? I asked. He reached for a notepad and scribbled a name. Patrick O'Connor. He's one of the best family law attorneys in South Jersey. Experienced, sharp, and he has no patience for scams like this. Tell him I sent you. I folded the slip of paper carefully into my wallet. Thank you, Alan. Truly. He gave me a steady look. Helen, you've always been one of the most disciplined clients I've ever worked with. Don't let them shake you. You have the resources and the evidence. Now you just need the right legal shield. I walked out of the bank taller than when I had entered. The sun was bright, the air salty with the ocean breeze, and for the first time in days, I felt the faintest glimmer of power returning to me. Patrick O'Connor's office was in a historic building on Lafayette Street, its white columns and navy blue shutters, giving it the kind of dignity that demanded respect. I stepped through the door at precisely 4 o'clock, my folder clutched tightly in my hands. The receptionist, a young woman with dark hair pulled into a bun, smiled warmly. Mrs. Whitaker? Mr. O'Connor will see you now. N. The man who greeted me was in his mid-60s, tall and lean, with a head of thick gray hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything. His handshake was firm, his voice steady. Helen, please, sit down. Alan called me earlier. He said you found yourself in a very unfortunate situation. That's putting it lightly, I said, my voice cracking just enough to betray the strain of the last few days. Tell me everything, he said. Don't hold back and don't leave out details. The more I know, the stronger we can build your case. So I told him. Again. For the third time in as many days, I repeated the humiliations, the insults, the theft, the forged documents. I laid it all out, every ugly truth. Patrick listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting down notes in neat handwriting. His expression never shifted, but his eyes grew sharper with each detail. When I finished, I slid the stack of evidence across the desk. He leafed through it carefully, pausing at the forged medical report. He tapped it with his pen. Did this doctor ever examine you? Never. I've never even seen him. Patrick's mouth tightened. That's falsification of medical documents. That's not just unethical, it's criminal. And whoever bribed him could be facing charges too. I sat up straighter. So I have a case? A strong one, he said firmly. Stronger than most I've seen. We have trespassing, theft, fraud, falsified medical documents, attempted property transfer under false pretenses. Your daughter-in-law and her family didn't just cross a line, they bulldozed right over it. And Dan? I whispered. My son? Patrick's eyes softened, but his voice remained steady. If his name is on these documents, he's legally complicit. That will be hard for you, but it's the truth. I nodded slowly. The truth hurt, but denial hurt worse. Patrick leaned forward. Here's what we'll do. Tomorrow morning, we'll file an eviction lawsuit for illegal trespassing. Given that the deed is entirely in your name and you pay all taxes, the court should move quickly. We'll request an emergency order for immediate removal. My heart lifted. How quickly? If the judge sees the evidence clearly, which I believe he will, you could have them out within days, maybe even hours. And the stolen items? We'll report them to the police as theft. The watch, the earrings, the coins you have proof, insurance documents, photographs. That strengthens your case. And the forged medical report? That will go to the state medical board and the district attorney. We're not just talking civil matters here, Helen. This is criminal. If they push, they could be facing jail time. I swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. Jail time. For my son. For Marissa. Patrick's gaze was steady. I have to ask you something, Helen. Are you prepared to go all the way with this? Once we start, there's no turning back. Your relationship with your son may not survive. I looked down at my hands, at the wrinkles carved by years of work, at the fingers calloused from decades of sewing. I thought of Dan as a boy, feverish in bed while I sat by his side through the night. I thought of him as a young man, hugging me on the deck of the beach house and calling me the strongest woman he knew. And then I thought of him now signing his name to papers that declared me incompetent, betraying me for money, letting his wife humiliate me in public. My son made his choice, I said quietly. He chose money over his mother. If our relationship can't survive this, then it was already broken. Patrick's eyes flickered with respect. Then we fight. And Helen, I'll tell you this. They think they've outsmarted you, but they've underestimated you. That's always a fatal mistake. End of quote. For the first time in nearly a week, I smiled. Not a forced smile, not one meant to hide pain, but a true smile of resolve. Let's begin, I said. That night, back at the Sand Dune Inn, I laid out my notes on the desk like a general planning a campaign. Tomorrow, the battle would begin in earnest. Tomorrow, I would no longer be the humiliated widow thrown out of her own house. Tomorrow, I would be the woman who fought back. The morning of the eviction order dawned bright and clear, the kind of Cape May summer morning tourists dream about. The gulls wheeled above the shoreline, the air thick with the smell of sunscreen and salt. But while families headed to the beach with their umbrellas and coolers, I dressed in my best gray suit, tied my hair neatly, and gathered my evidence folder. This wasn't a vacation day. It was battle day. At 8 sharp, I met Patrick O'Connor in the hotel lobby. He was accompanied by a uniformed police officer and a public notary with a briefcase full of documents. Patrick's expression was calm, businesslike. The officer gave me a polite nod, and the notary introduced herself with quiet professionalism. "You ready?" Patrick asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said. We caravaned to my house, our cars pulling up the driveway one after the other. From a distance, I could already see the scene unfolding. Marissa and Dolores laughing over coffee on the deck, Vanessa taking selfies with her phone, children running wild across my trampled lawn. It looked like any other happy family vacation, except it was built on theft and lies. When the police car stopped at the curb, Marissa froze mid-laugh. Her coffee cup slipped from her hand, spilling across the deck boards. Dolores turned pale. Vanessa raised her phone instinctively, already recording. Patrick was the first to speak, his voice steady and strong. "Good morning. I am Patrick O'Connor, legal counsel for Mrs. Helen Whitaker, the rightful owner of this property. We are here with a court-ordered eviction notice for illegal trespassing." Marissa sprang to her feet, her face contorting. "What? That's ridiculous. This is my husband's house. We have every right to be here." The police officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, do you have any documents proving you own this property?" She stammered. "My husband Dan, he's the owner's son. He gave me permission." "Permission from a family member does not override the deed," the officer said flatly. He turned to Patrick. "Do you have the deed?" Patrick handed over a copy. "The deed is solely in Mrs. Whitaker's name. All taxes for the past 5 years have been paid by her alone." The officer scanned the paper, then nodded. "That's enough. This order is valid. You and your family have 2 hours to vacate the premises." Dolores gasped. 2 hours? That's impossible. We have children here. Patrick's eyes were cold. "Perhaps you should have considered that before invading someone else's property." Vanessa kept recording, her voice shrill. "This is elder abuse. She's crazy. You're all bullying us." The notary stepped in, her tone firm. "Miss, you are not authorized to record a legal proceeding. Please stop now." But Vanessa kept filming until the police officer took her phone. "Any further obstruction," he said, "and you'll be arrested." Marissa's face turned crimson. She spun toward me, her eyes blazing. "You think you're clever, don't you? You think you can humiliate us like this? You'll regret it, Helen. You'll pay for this." I met her glare without flinching. I already paid for this house. You're the one who thought you could steal it. Now you'll pay the price." Inside, chaos erupted. Dolores barked orders at the children. Vanessa stormed from room to room, scooping clothes into garbage bags. Rick cursed under his breath, shoving bottles of liquor into a cooler. Tessa tried to calm her crying baby, while Wyatt muttered about lawyers and unfair treatment. From the deck, I watched it all unfold, my heart pounding but my back straight. For the first time in days, I felt the power shift back into my hands. Dan arrived 20 minutes later, pulling into the driveway in his shiny new SUV. He climbed out quickly, his tie loose, his face pale. "What's going on?" he demanded. Patrick stepped forward. "Your wife and her family are being evicted from your mother's property for illegal trespassing, and you, Mr. Whitaker, are being cited as an accomplice in attempted asset fraud." Dan's mouth fell open. "Asset fraud? What are you talking about?" I pulled the forged property transfer papers from my folder and held them up. "These, Daniel, your signature, your name, declaring me mentally incompetent so you could steal my house. Ring any bells?" His hands trembled as he took the papers. For a moment, his face softened, and I saw the scared boy he once was. But then Marissa appeared at his side, whispering furiously in his ear. His jaw clenched. "Mom, I can explain. There is nothing left to explain." I cut him off. "You made your choice." Marissa's voice rose, shrill with desperation. "Don't listen to her, Dan. She's confused. She doesn't know what she's talking about." Patrick pulled out another document. "Mr. Whitaker, you are officially cited to appear in family court within 3 days to answer for these charges. Your complicity is clear." Dan's face turned gray. "But she's my mother. She can't sue me." "And?" The officer's voice was flat. "Fraud is fraud, Mr. Whitaker. It doesn't matter who commits it." Dolores wailed. "This is unfair. We're family. Families don't do this to each other." I turned toward her, my voice calm but firm. "Families also don't invade houses, steal jewelry, falsify medical reports, and try to erase their elders. You broke the rules of family long before I did." The 2 hours ticked by like scenes from a chaotic play. Vanessa shouted into the air about injustice, but no one listened. Rick cursed as he carried boxes to his car. Dolores sat on the stairs, crying loudly, refusing to pack until Marissa screamed at her. The children cried, confused and frightened, their innocence caught in the crossfire of greed. Dan avoided my eyes as he hauled suitcases to the SUV. Marissa stormed around, her face red with rage, barking orders as though still in control. But I could see the fear beneath her fury. For the first time, she realized she was losing. With 30 minutes left, Dan finally approached me. His voice was low, pleading. "Mom, please. Let's work something out. We can fix this without courts and police. You keep the house, we'll apologize, and you drop everything. No lawsuits, no charges." I looked at him, my heart heavy but my resolve unshaken. "And the stolen jewelry? The fake medical report? The humiliation? That all just disappears too?" His lips trembled. "It was a mistake, a misunderstanding." I shook my head slowly. "You didn't just make a mistake, Daniel. You betrayed me. You betrayed everything I ever sacrificed for you." Marissa appeared beside him, her voice shrill. "Don't let her guilt you, Dan. Tell her the truth. Tell her you agreed. Tell her it's time you put your real family first." Dan's shoulders sagged. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. My heart broke all over again, but I stood tall. "It's too late. The law will decide now." At the 2-hour mark, the officer blew his whistle. "Time's up, everyone out." The cars began pulling away one by one, loaded with garbage bags and shouting children. Vanessa muttered curses under her breath. Dolores glared at me with tear-stained cheeks. Rick revved his engine angrily. Marissa was the last. She rolled down the window of her SUV, her eyes blazing with hatred. "This isn't over, you bitter old woman. We'll appeal. We'll prove you're crazy." I smiled faintly. "Go ahead. My lawyer will be waiting." She slammed her foot on the gas, kicking up dust as she sped down the driveway. Dan was in the passenger seat, staring at the ground, unable to meet my eyes. The officer handed me my keys. "Mrs. Whitaker, your house is officially returned to you." I took them with steady hands. My knees felt weak, but my spirit soared. I walked up the steps of my deck, my heels clicking against the boards. For the first time in a week, I stood in my house alone. The silence was heavy, the room still stinking of smoke and grease, the furniture stained and battered. But it was mine again, and I would rebuild. The day after the eviction, my house was quiet again, too quiet. The silence gave me space to see the damage clearly grease-caked on the stove, broken china in the trash, my bedroom stripped of dignity, my secret closet violated. Yes, I had won the first round. But the violation ran deep, and no court order could erase it. That afternoon, Patrick O'Connor called me into his office. He looked sharper than usual, almost energized. "Helen," he said, tapping a folder on his desk. "The prosecutor has agreed to open a criminal investigation. This is no longer just a civil matter." My breath caught. Criminal? Yes. Fraud, theft, conspiracy against a senior citizen. And the falsified medical report? That's federal. The doctor who signed it is already suspended. They've discovered he's been selling false diagnoses for cash. Your case may expose his entire operation. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something shift inside me. Until now, I had seen myself as a victim. But suddenly, I realized this wasn't just about me. I wasn't just fighting for my own house. I was standing up for every older person who had been targeted, every parent who had been tricked by greedy children. Patrick leaned closer. "Dan and Marissa will likely be indicted. With the evidence we've gathered, the forged documents, the stolen jewelry, your neighbor's video of them moving your belongings, they don't stand a chance of walking away clean. My guess? They'll take a plea deal to avoid prison. Heavy fines, probation, community service, and a permanent criminal record." My chest tightened at the words. "And Dan?" Patrick's voice softened. "His name is on the documents. Legally, he's complicit. That's the truth. I'm 69. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I saw my son as a little boy, clutching my hand as we planted the first tree in the garden. Then I saw him as a man, signing papers that labeled me incompetent. That second image burned deeper. When I opened my eyes again, I was calm. Then let the law do what it must. The investigation moved quickly. Detectives photographed every room of my house, cataloged the missing jewelry, took my insurance papers as proof. Walter Briggs, my neighbor, handed over the videos he'd filmed Marissa's family bragging about their new beach house, my belongings stuffed into cars. Evidence stacked higher each day, and with it, the walls closed in on Dan and Marissa. By mid-July, the news was everywhere in Cape May. People whispered in church pews. Neighbors stopped me in the grocery store to offer support. Some shook their heads in disbelief. How could your own son do this? But most told me the same thing. You're brave for fighting back. Dan and Marissa, meanwhile, stayed silent. No calls, no letters, no apologies. Only silence. Then, one sweltering afternoon, Patrick called me with the news. "They've been indicted," he said, simply. The word echoed in my mind like a church bell. Indicted. "Both of them?" I asked. "Yes. Dan and Marissa are officially charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, elder financial abuse, and theft. The doctor, too, he's facing charges of falsifying medical records and bribery. Helen, your case is going to make an example of them all." I gripped the edge of my kitchen counter. My knees wobbled, but it wasn't fear. It was the weight of justice finally arriving. "What happens now?" I asked. "There will be hearings, negotiations, likely a plea deal. They won't escape the consequences." I nodded slowly, relief mixed with sorrow. My son's name was now tied to fraud, not honor, but he had tied it there himself. At their first court appearance, I stood on the courthouse steps as cameras flashed. Marissa walked quickly, her chin high but her eyes darting. Dan trailed behind her, his shoulders slumped, looking older than his years. For a brief moment, his eyes met mine. No warmth, no regret, just resentment. I turned away and walked inside. That night, I sat on my porch, listening to the waves. The house was scarred, but it was mine again, and justice was on its way. Marissa had once laughed in my face, declaring I was powerless. But now, the laugh was gone. She and Dan were trapped in a legal storm of their own making. They had underestimated me, and that was their downfall. As the stars came out over Cape May, I whispered into the night air, "You thought I was just an old woman. You were wrong. You declared war, and I intend to win." In the weeks after the indictment, the tides shifted even further. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the balance of power move back toward me. It wasn't just about courtrooms or legal filings anymore, it was about the way the world saw the truth. Word traveled quickly in Cape May. In a town as small as ours, nothing stayed secret for long. At the farmer's market, neighbors approached me quietly, squeezing my hand, whispering, "We're with you." At church, parishioners who once nodded politely now stopped to talk, asking if I needed help, offering casseroles, even volunteering to clean the house. But the whispers about Dan and Marissa were louder still. People shook their heads when they mentioned them. Some said, "Imagine betraying your own mother like that." Others muttered, "I always thought Marissa was too slick for her own good." The town had made up its mind. They were guilty not just in court, but in reputation. I didn't seek comfort in their gossip. But I won't lie, it steadied me to know that people could see what I saw, that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't imagining this betrayal. Meanwhile, Dan and Marissa were unraveling. I didn't hear it from them, of course. I heard it the way everyone else did, through neighbors, mutual acquaintances, even Marissa's own sister, who couldn't seem to keep her mouth shut. They had already spent $15,000 on lawyers, and the bills kept piling up. Marissa had posted less and less on social media. The pictures of beach trips, brunches, and new outfits were replaced by silence. When Vanessa accidentally leaked that their credit cards were maxed and their mortgage 3 months behind, it became clear even to strangers. They were drowning. Part of me wanted to feel pity. But then I remembered the note in Marissa's handwriting. "Just need Dan to sign and make sure the old lady doesn't cause trouble." I didn't feel pity. While they scrambled, I turned inward, focusing on the place that had been so deeply violated, my home. The first thing I did was change every lock. The second was install cameras, small, discreet, but sharp-eyed. I refused to be caught off guard again. Then I called a professional cleaning service from Atlantic City, a team of 4 women who showed up with buckets, scrub brushes, and determination. For 2 full days, they worked. They scrubbed the stove until it gleamed, washed the walls, aired out the carpets, and beat the dust from the curtains. They tackled the upstairs bathroom, scouring away the black streaks from hair dye, bleaching the tub until it shone like new. They washed my quilt twice, but the stains wouldn't come out. I decided to keep it anyway. Scars tell stories, and mine told the truth. When the house smelled like lemons and soap again, I felt as though a weight had been lifted from my chest. But cleaning wasn't enough. I wanted to reclaim the spirit of the house, not just its surfaces. So I went to the garden. My poor geraniums were crushed, their blossoms torn, their stems bent to the soil. For a long moment, I stood over them, my throat tightening. Then I knelt, pulled on my gloves, and began to dig. Hours passed as I replanted, trimmed, watered. The sun beat down, my back ached, and my hands grew sore. But when I stood again, the rows were neat, the soil fresh, the green shoots promising life. It reminded me of myself, bruised, bent, but still capable of growing back. One evening, as I watered the garden, Walter Briggs ambled over from across the street. He was carrying a pie in one hand and his phone in the other. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing me the pie. "Peach, my wife's recipe." "Thank you, Walter," I said, touched. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Helen, I've shown the video I recorded to a few folks, the one of Marissa's family moving your stuff. Word spread fast. People know what they did. If they thought they could play the victims in this town, they were wrong." I nodded. "Let them face the truth, Walter. I'm done carrying their shame." He looked at me for a moment, then said, "You know, you're stronger than any of us realized." I smiled faintly. They underestimated me. Everyone always does. By late summer, the legal wheels turned harder. Patrick kept me updated. "They're desperate," he told me one afternoon over coffee. "They've tried to negotiate lighter terms, but the prosecutor isn't bending. Between the stolen jewelry, the forged medical report, and the fraudulent transfer request, the evidence is overwhelming." "Do you think they'll go to jail?" I asked quietly. Probably not, Patrick admitted. But probation, fines, community service, it's all on the table, and the criminal record will follow them for life. Employers, neighbors, even schools for their kids will know. That's its own kind of sentence. I nodded slowly. Justice comes in many forms. I didn't see Dan until early September. I was pulling weeds in the garden when his car slowed at the curb. He didn't get out. He just sat there, staring at me through the windshield. For a long moment, we looked at each other, the mother who had given him everything, the son who had tried to take it all away. Then he drove off without a word. I turned back to my weeds. Some roots are too deep to pull in a day. By autumn, my house was nearly whole again. The paint was fresh, the garden alive, the locks strong, the cameras watching. I had even bought myself a new set of china plates, not to replace what was lost, but to start anew. As I set them in the cabinet, I realized something. I wasn't just restoring my house. I was restoring myself. The woman who had walked into Cape May that June was a widow seeking peace. The woman standing here now was a fighter who had taken back her life. And Dan and Marissa, they were the ones now scrambling, paying lawyers they couldn't afford, whispering excuses no one wanted to hear, drowning under the weight of their own choices. I didn't need revenge. I already had what mattered most. My dignity, my independence, my home. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The ocean waves rolled steady, the stars stretched wide across the sky. I closed my eyes and breathed in the salt air. They had tried to strip me of everything, but I was still here, still standing, and I would not be moved again. It was a gray afternoon in late September when the knock came. I was in the kitchen, arranging my new set of china plates carefully in the cabinet, when the sound echoed through the house. It wasn't the confident rap of a neighbor or the lazy thump of a delivery driver. It was tentative, halting, almost apologetic. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door. Marissa stood there, alone. Her hair was pulled back carelessly, her eyes swollen and red as if she'd been crying for days. In her hands was a canvas shopping bag, sagging with weight. For the first time since I had known her, she looked small, not like the sharp-tongued woman who once mocked me in front of strangers, but like a scolded child who had finally been caught. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside without a word. She walked into the living room and set the bag on the coffee table. Slowly, she pulled out the contents. My pearl earrings, my mother's necklace, the gold watch that once belonged to my husband, and the silver coins I had collected over a lifetime. They glinted under the afternoon light, familiar yet foreign, like pieces of myself I had thought lost forever. "I came to return your things," Marissa said, "and to apologize." I lowered myself into the armchair across from her. "Go on." She wrung her hands together, eyes darting from the jewelry to me. "I know I behaved badly, very badly. I was desperate. Robert Dan, he told me you had this house sitting empty most of the year while we were drowning in bills. The mortgage, the kids' tuition, the credit cards we couldn't keep up. And when I saw this place, I thought—" She trailed off, swallowing hard. "You thought what?" I asked quietly. "I thought it wasn't fair," she whispered. "That you had all this while we struggled. I thought maybe you didn't really need it, that maybe we needed it more." Her words stung, but not because they were true, because they revealed how little she understood. "And so you decided to take it?" "I didn't want to steal it," she said quickly. "I just wanted to use it, and then, when the lawyer suggested transferring the deed through a medical report, I thought maybe it was easier, faster. He told us it wasn't fraud if it was within the family." I stared at her. "A lawyer told you to falsify medical documents?" Her face twisted with shame. "Yes, he said it happens all the time, that it would save us money and avoid future legal issues." I believed him. I leaned back in my chair. "So you were willing to declare me senile, incompetent, incapable of managing my own affairs all because it was easier?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I wasn't thinking clearly. I just saw a way out of our problems. I thought you'd never fight back. End of." That last sentence hung in the air like smoke. She had thought I would roll over, that I would cry quietly, retreat into my apartment, and let her have everything I had worked for. "You underestimated me," I said softly. She nodded miserably. "I know, and I'm sorry, truly. I came today because I need to ask you for something. I folded my hands in my lap. What is it? Please, she whispered. Drop the charges. The fines, the probation, the record, it's destroying us. Robert might lose his job. The kids, they're suffering. We've already lost so much. Please, if not for me, then for them. For your grandchildren. I felt a twist in my chest at the mention of the children. They were innocent. They hadn't chosen this. But then I remembered that day on the porch, when her niece had sneered at me. Why don't you just go to a hotel? Those children had been taught to see me as disposable. And who had taught them that? If not Marissa. I shook my head slowly. Marissa, actions have consequences. You thought you could erase me from my own house, from my own life. And now you want me to erase the consequences as easily as you erased my name from those documents? Her lips trembled. I was wrong. I admit it. But people make mistakes. Mistakes? My voice hardened. A mistake is spilling milk or forgetting a birthday. What you did was calculated. You humiliated me. You destroyed my belongings. You mocked me in front of strangers. You paid a doctor to sign false papers declaring me unfit. That's not a mistake, Marissa. That's betrayal. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. For a moment, I almost felt the stirrings of compassion. But I reminded myself, her tears weren't for me. They were for herself, for the weight of her crumbling life. When her sobs quieted, I spoke again. If you truly want to make amends, bring Robert here. I want him to look me in the eyes and admit what he did. Until then, nothing changes. She shook her head, wiping at her face. He won't come. He says you're not his mother anymore. He says a real mother wouldn't sue her own son. The words hit me like stones, but I sat still. If Dan thought that, then he had made his choice. And what do you think? I asked her. Marissa's gaze flickered. I think we started this. But I also think you've taken it too far. We could have handled this as a family, not in court. I laughed, a bitter sound that surprised even me. Handled this as a family? You didn't come to me as family. You came as thieves. And families don't steal from each other. She stood slowly, her shoulders slumped. So there's no hope? The way to fix this, I said quietly, was not to do it in the first place. She stared at me for a long moment, then picked up her empty bag and walked to the door. At the threshold, she turned back, her eyes filled with something between fury and despair. You'll regret this, she whispered. One day, you'll regret pushing us away. I met her gaze, unflinching. No, Marissa. The only regret here is yours for underestimating me. And with that, she was gone. That evening, I sat on the porch, the jewelry spread before me on the table. The earrings, the watch, the coins, they were back in my possession. But they felt different now, heavier, as if they carried not just memories of the past, but scars of betrayal. I picked up the watch, running my thumb over its smooth face. My husband had worn it through years of honest work, every tick a reminder of time well spent. Dan should have inherited it someday, but now I wasn't sure he deserved to. The stars came out over the Atlantic, steady and indifferent. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to the night, You wanted everything, Marissa, and now you have nothing. A week after Marissa showed up with the jewelry, a letter arrived in my mailbox. It was the first time I had heard directly from Dan since the eviction. The envelope was plain, his handwriting rushed and uneven like it had been scribbled in anger. For a long moment, I just stood on the porch, the paper trembling in my hands. Part of me wanted to throw it straight into the trash, but curiosity and something deeper, something maternal I could never quite kill, made me open it. Inside were 3 pages, the words scrawled tightly across the paper. Mom, I don't know why I'm even writing this. Maybe because Marissa begged me to. Maybe because I still think somewhere inside you're the woman who raised me, not the one who destroyed our family. You think you've won. You think you've taught us a lesson. But what you've really done is choose money over your own blood. What kind of mother drags her son into court? What kind of mother ruins her grandchildren's future just to keep a house she barely even uses? I trusted you, Mom. I thought you would understand that I was doing this for my family, for the kids, for Marissa, for our future. But instead, you chose to humiliate me in public. You chose to let lawyers and judges handle what should have been settled privately. Families don't do that. Families don't sue each other. You've turned everyone against us. People whisper when we walk into the grocery store. The kids hear things at school. I've spent over $20,000 on lawyers already, and the fines aren't even final. Do you think that doesn't hurt me? Do you think it doesn't keep me awake at night? Maybe one day you'll realize that what you've done is worse than anything we tried to do. Maybe one day you'll regret it. But by then, it will be too late. Don't expect me to forgive you. Don't expect me to come back begging. You made your choice, and I'm making mine. Dan, my hands shook as I set the letter down. The words blurred, not because of poor handwriting, but because my eyes had filled with tears. I sat in silence, listening to the steady tick of the clock on the mantel. The house was quiet, filled only with the sound of the waves in the distance. But inside me, a storm raged. How could he twist it this way? How could he paint me as the villain, as though I had betrayed him when he had signed his name to the papers that declared me incompetent? How could he write about family after allowing his wife to spit venom in my own home? And yet, buried in his anger, I could still hear the boy he once was, the boy who wanted to please me, who wanted to believe he was doing the right thing. But now that boy was gone, buried under years of resentment, pride, and Marissa's poisonous influence. That evening, I sat on the porch with the letter in my lap. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. I read his words again and again, until the paper felt heavy with their weight. I thought about what family really meant. Family was the hand that steadies you when you're young. Family is the voice that tells you to keep going when the world says stop. Family is sacrifice without expectation of repayment. I had done all of that for Dan. Every long night at the sewing machine, every dollar saved, every choice I made after his father died, I did it for him. I didn't ask for thanks. I only wanted respect. And in return, he had tried to strip me of the very roof over my head. That was not family. That was betrayal, dressed up as practicality. The next morning, I pulled out an old photo album. I hadn't opened it in years. The leather cover was cracked, the pages yellowed with time. But the pictures were still clear: Dan as a boy with a missing front tooth, Dan holding his first baseball glove, Dan standing beside me at the beach house the day it was finished. His arm was slung around my shoulders, his smile wide with pride. I traced his face with my finger, the tears falling freely now. "Where did you go?" I whispered. "What happened to the boy who loved me?" No answer came, only the memory of laughter, now soured by the bitterness of reality. Later that week, Patrick stopped by with updates. He found me sitting at the dining table, the letter lying open beside me. "You read it," he said gently. "Yes," I replied. "And?" I pushed the paper toward him. "He blames me, says I chose money over family, says I ruined his life." Patrick read silently, his brow furrowing. When he finished, he set the letter down. Classic deflection. He can't face the truth, so he shifts the blame. "Don't let his words break you, Helen. You know what really happened." "I know," I said softly, "but it still hurts." He nodded. "Of course it does. He's your son. Betrayal from a stranger is one thing. Betrayal from your own blood cuts deeper. But Helen, you stood your ground. You did what was right, not just for yourself, but for every senior who might have faced the same scam. Don't forget that." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I won't." That night, I sat again on the porch, the letter in my lap, the photo album beside me. I let the ocean breeze wash over me, carrying away some of the heaviness. Dan thought I would regret this. But regret belongs to those who act without honor, without truth. I didn't regret defending myself. I didn't regret standing up for my dignity. The only thing I regretted was losing the boy I once knew, the boy who had hugged me on the deck of this house and promised to tell his future children how strong his mother was. That boy was gone, and the man who had replaced him was a stranger to me. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I slid it into the bottom drawer of my desk, not to forget it, but to remind myself. Blood alone does not make a family. Love does. Respect does. And those things cannot be forged. The courthouse in Cape May isn't a grand building. It doesn't have the sweeping marble steps of Philadelphia or the vaulted ceilings of Washington. It's a modest brick structure with white trim and an American flag fluttering at the entrance. But on the morning of the final hearing, it felt heavier than any cathedral I'd ever stepped into. I wore my best Navy suit, the one I usually saved for weddings and funerals. Patrick O'Connor met me outside, his briefcase in hand. His expression was calm, steady, as though this were just another day at work. For me, it felt like the closing act of a play that had consumed every part of my life. "You ready?" he asked. I drew a long breath. Yes. Inside, the courtroom was already filling. A few reporters had squeezed into the benches, their pens poised, hungry for scandal. Neighbors from Cape May sat quietly in the back, their faces somber. And at the defense table sat Dan and Marissa. Marissa looked thinner than I remembered, her hair pulled back tight, her face pale. Dan wore a suit, but it hung on him awkwardly, as though he'd lost weight. His eyes stayed fixed on the table in front of him, never daring to meet mine. The judge entered, and we all rose. A gavel struck. The final act began. The prosecutor laid out the case first. He spoke with measured authority, his voice filling the room. "Your Honor, we are here because the defendants conspired to strip Mrs. Helen Whitaker, a 70-year-old widow, of her property through fraudulent means. They obtained a falsified medical report declaring her incompetent. They attempted to transfer the deed of her beach house without her knowledge or consent. They trespassed, destroyed property, and stole valuables." End quote. He held up photographs, my broken china, my stained quilt, the jewelry that Marissa had eventually returned. He played Walter Briggs' video, showing Marissa's family carrying my belongings into cars, laughing about their new beach house. Each piece of evidence was a knife, not into me, but into them. And still, Dan sat staring at the table, his hands clasped so tightly the knuckles were white. When the defense finally spoke, their lawyer painted a picture of misunderstanding, of family disagreements blown out of proportion. He spoke of financial stress, of good intentions gone wrong. Robert Whitaker, he said, using Dan's full name, was motivated not by malice, but by desperation to provide for his children. Marissa, too, acted under the strain of financial hardship. While their methods were misguided, their intentions were not criminal, they were family matters that spiraled out of control. I almost laughed out loud. Not criminal? Forged medical reports? Stolen jewelry? A house nearly taken from me, if that wasn't criminal? What was? The judge listened silently, his face unreadable. Finally, it was my turn to speak. Patrick had warned me it would come, but standing there, facing my son and daughter-in-law with the whole courtroom watching, my knees trembled. "Mrs. Whitaker," the judge said, "you may address the court." I stood slowly, my palms damp, my voice quivering at first but gaining strength with each word. "Your Honor, I am not here because of money. I am here because of dignity. I built that house with my own 2 hands after my husband died. Every dollar came from long nights at the sewing machine, every brick laid with sacrifice. It was not just a house, it was proof that I could survive, that I could give my son a future. And yet, the people I trusted most invaded it, destroyed it, and tried to erase me from it. They told me I was a parasite. They told me there was no room for me in my own home. They tried to have me declared incompetent when I am not. This isn't about family disagreements. This is about betrayal. This is about being treated as though my life's work meant nothing, as though I meant nothing. I ask this court to see the truth, because if this can happen to me, it can happen to anyone." Silence filled the courtroom when I sat back down. For the first time, I saw Dan's shoulders shake. He didn't look up, but I knew he was crying. The judge withdrew for deliberation. When he returned, the room fell silent again. "Robert and Marissa Whitaker," he said, his voice firm, "this court finds you guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, elder financial abuse, and theft. Given your cooperation in returning the stolen items and your lack of prior criminal records, the court will not impose jail time. Instead, you are sentenced to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service each, and fines totaling $25,000. You will also carry a permanent criminal record." The gavel struck. The verdict was sealed. Marissa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dan sagged forward, covering his face with his hands. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Patrick leaned toward me. "It's over," he said softly. But as I looked at them, I realized it wasn't truly over. The law had spoken, but the rift between us was permanent. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Questions flew. "Mrs. Whitaker, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you think justice was served?" I paused on the steps, the autumn wind tugging at my jacket. "I feel," I said clearly, "that no one should ever underestimate an older woman. Justice was served today not just for me, but for every senior who has been treated as though their life's work can be stolen." The cameras flashed. The words would be printed in tomorrow's paper. But they weren't for the reporters. They were for Dan and Marissa, who were escorted out a side door, their heads bowed. That night, I returned to my house. The sky was clear, the stars sharp above the ocean. I set the verdict papers on the table and poured myself a cup of tea. The war they had declared was over. I had not only survived, I had won. But as I sat there, the victory was bittersweet. I had lost a son, or maybe I had lost him long ago, and only now could I admit it. I looked around my living room, clean and quiet once more. The house was still mine. My dignity was still mine. My independence was still mine. And that would have to be enough. I raised my cup of tea to the night and whispered, "To peace." For the first time in months, I truly believed it was possible. The week after the verdict, the air in Cape May seemed lighter. The tension that had wrapped itself around my chest for months loosened, and I could breathe again. But freedom came with silence, and silence carried questions I could no longer avoid. What would happen to my house after I was gone? For years, I had assumed it would pass naturally to Dan. That's what families did. Mothers left their homes to their children, and the children carried on the legacy. It was the way of things, the rhythm of generations. But the courtroom had shattered that illusion. My own son had signed papers declaring me incompetent. My own son had stood by while his wife laughed in my face. He had betrayed me, not by accident but by choice. I could no longer pretend the house would be safe in his hands. One morning, I drove to the attorney's office in town, a different one than Patrick's this time, a specialist in estate planning. Her name was Susan Delgado, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a softer smile. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Whitaker?" she asked as I sat across from her. I took a deep breath. "I want to change my will." She nodded calmly. "That's not uncommon after situations like yours. Do you have an idea of what you'd like to do?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I want to remove my son as beneficiary, completely. And I want my beach house and everything in it to go to charity. I want it to serve a purpose beyond my family. Because family, I've learned, doesn't always mean what you think it does." Susan studied me for a moment, then leaned forward. "That's a powerful choice, Helen. Do you know which charity?" I thought about it. The house had been my refuge after widowhood, my sanctuary when I had nothing else. It wasn't just walls and a roof. It was survival, dignity, proof that I could endure. "Yes," I said slowly. "I want it to go to a foundation for women, widows especially, a place where they can come to rest, to heal, to believe again that they're capable of standing on their own." Susan smiled softly. "That's beautiful. We can make it happen." That afternoon, I signed the documents. My hand trembled slightly as I wrote my name, not from doubt but from the weight of the decision. With each stroke of the pen, I felt something inside me shift. I was no longer tethered to Dan through obligation. My legacy was no longer chained to betrayal. The house would outlive me, yes, but not as a prize for greed. It would outlive me as a beacon for strength. That evening, I sat on the porch with the ocean breeze on my face and let the thought settle. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt peace. I imagined the future, the house filled with women who had lost their partners, women who needed a place to breathe, a place to remember who they were before the world broke them. I imagined them planting new flowers in my garden, cooking meals in my kitchen, sitting on my deck watching the same sunsets I had watched. That thought filled me with more joy than the idea of Dan inheriting it ever had. Of course, news of my decision spread quickly. It always did in a town like ours. Within days, neighbors were whispering, and by the end of the week, I received a call from Dolores. "You can't be serious," she hissed into the phone. "Leaving the house to strangers? To charity? That's madness." I held the phone steady. "It's my choice, and it's final." She spat the words like venom. You're robbing your own son after everything he's been through, after all the shame you've caused." "No, Dolores," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "He robbed himself when he chose greed over love. My house is no longer his concern." I hung up before she could respond. My hands didn't even tremble. A few days later, an envelope arrived. This time, it wasn't from Dan, but from Marissa. Inside was a single page, handwritten neatly, not scrawled in rage like Dan's had been. "Helen, I heard about your new will. I suppose this is your way of punishing us further. I can't stop you, but I hope one day you'll realize how cruel it is to cut your son out entirely. Whatever mistakes we made, he is still your blood, and blood should mean something." I folded the letter slowly, then set it aside. Blood did mean something, once, but respect meant more. Trust meant more, and both had been broken beyond repair. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sea turned gold, I walked the perimeter of the house. My fingers brushed the rough brick, the cool glass of the windows, the sturdy frame that had stood for 20 years. This house had carried me through widowhood. It had borne witness to laughter, to grief, to betrayal, and now it would carry others. I whispered to the walls, "You will not end with me. You will live on with purpose." And for the first time, I felt the house itself whisper back, not in words, but in the steady rhythm of the waves beyond it. That night, I sat in my armchair with a cup of tea. The documents were tucked safely in my desk, my legacy sealed in ink. I thought of Dan, of the boy he had been, of the man he had become. I would always love him. That much was true. But love did not mean surrender. Love did not mean erasing myself to keep him comfortable. And so, I chose differently. I chose to leave behind not a gift to a son who betrayed me, but a gift to women who, like me, once thought they were alone. I sipped my tea and looked out at the darkening sea. For the first time, I felt that my life's work would outlast betrayal. It would outlast pain. It would outlast even me. The first time I opened my house to other women, the air felt different. It wasn't the heavy silence of betrayal or the nervous quiet of waiting for court. It was expectant, alive, like the house itself knew it was about to take on new purpose. The partnership with the foundation had come together faster than I expected. Susan, my estate attorney, connected me with a nonprofit that supported widows and single mothers. They were thrilled at the idea of using my home as a retreat center somewhere women could come for a week or two, free of charge, to rest and rebuild. On the morning the first group arrived, I stood on the porch in a simple dress, my hands folded together, watching the vans pull into the driveway. There were 4 women, each carrying the same weary look I remembered in my own mirror years ago. The first to step out was Angela, a tall woman with tired eyes. She had lost her husband to cancer the year before and was raising 2 teenagers alone. Then came Rosa, petite and quiet, whose husband had died in an accident at sea. Behind her was Evelyn, a retired teacher who had buried her partner of 40 years. And finally, June, the youngest, not yet 30, who clutched a diaper bag and a baby to her chest. For a moment, none of them moved, as though unsure if they belonged. I smiled gently and opened my arms. "Welcome," I said. "This is your home now, too." That first evening, we sat together around the dining table. I had cooked a simple meal, roast chicken, green beans, cornbread, nothing fancy, but it filled the house with warmth. At first, the conversation was hesitant. Angela spoke about the exhaustion of working 2 jobs. Rosa admitted she hadn't slept through the night in months. Evelyn said she felt invisible now that she was alone. June kept quiet, rocking her baby, her eyes shadowed with grief. As they talked, I listened. Their words echoed pieces of my own past, those long nights at the sewing machine after my husband died, the loneliness that settled like dust in every corner of my life. I saw myself in each of them, and my heart ached with recognition. "Finally," I said, "you are not alone anymore. You're here because you're strong enough to keep going. And this house is proof that we can build new lives even from the ashes of loss." Silence followed, but it was not heavy. It was full, like soil ready for planting. Over the next few days, the house began to breathe differently. Angela spent mornings walking the beach, her shoulders loosening a little each day. Rosa tended the garden with me, her hands careful as she touched the soil. Evelyn found my shelves of books and spent hours reading on the porch swing, her laughter ringing out for the first time in months. And June, sweet June, slept. Really slept. Her baby cooed in the sunshine while the rest of us watched, giving her the gift of rest she so desperately needed. The house, once scarred by trespassers, now hummed with healing. The kitchen was filled with the smell of shared meals. The living room echoed with quiet conversation. The deck once again became a place for watching the sunset in peace. One night, as we sat outside listening to the waves, Evelyn said softly, "Helen, I think your house is holy." I chuckled. "It's just brick and wood." "No," she insisted. "It's more. It carries something you put into it. We can feel it." I didn't answer, but inside, I knew she was right. The house carried my scars, my battles, my survival, and now it carried theirs too. When the women left 2 weeks later, the house felt different again, not empty, but full of memory. They hugged me tightly, tears shining in their eyes. "You gave us more than a roof," Angela said. "You gave us hope." As their van disappeared down the road, I stood on the porch, my heart swelling. For years I had thought my legacy was just brick and mortar. But now I saw clearly. My legacy was healing. My house wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every woman who needed it. That night, I sat at my desk and opened my journal. I wrote down a single sentence. They tried to take this house from me. Instead, I turned it into something they could never touch. I closed the journal and looked out at the moonlit sea. The waves rolled steady, eternal. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was building something bigger than myself. And I knew, deep in my bones, that my house had finally found its true purpose. When I first moved to Cape May, I thought I would be invisible. Just another older woman keeping her garden tidy, attending church on Sundays, buying groceries at the market. My house was my sanctuary, but my life was small, quiet. I never imagined the community would look at me any differently than they did anyone else. But after the trial, after the women's retreat began, something shifted. Everywhere I went, people stopped me. At the farmer's market, the woman who sold fresh peaches pressed 2 extra into my bag and whispered, "For you, Mrs. Whitaker, you inspire us." At church, the pastor mentioned me in his sermon, not by name, but by story. "Sometimes," he said, "we must stand firm against betrayal, even from those closest to us. Sometimes the strongest faith is simply refusing to be erased." The congregation turned their heads toward me, their eyes warm with respect. Even walking down Washington Street, strangers nodded, tipping their hats or murmuring, "Good for you, ma'am. Good for you." At first, it embarrassed me. I wasn't looking to be a symbol. I just wanted my house back, my dignity intact. But slowly, I realized something. My fight had become bigger than me. People saw in me the courage they wanted for themselves, the courage to stand up when the world tried to push them down. While my world grew brighter, Dan and Marissa's grew darker. I didn't seek updates about them, but Cape May is small. The whispers found me whether I wanted them or not. Marissa stopped showing her face at the boutiques where she used to shop every weekend. Her credit at the stores had dried up, and her friends, if you could call them that, kept their distance. People didn't want to be associated with a woman who had tried to steal from her own mother-in-law. Dan still worked at his office in Atlantic City, but the promotion he'd once been so proud of had slipped through his fingers. Word spread fast in professional circles. Who wanted a manager with a fraud conviction hanging over his head? I heard he drove an older car now, the shiny Toyota long gone. Their children no longer wore matching brand-new outfits. They looked like ordinary kids, sometimes even a little scruffy when I glimpsed them around town. It wasn't poverty, not yet, but it was humiliation. And in a place like this, humiliation spread faster than fire. One afternoon, as I was leaving the grocery store with a bag of apples, I saw Marissa standing in the parking lot. She was alone, staring at the ground, her posture slumped. When her eyes lifted and caught mine, for a moment I thought she would walk over. But instead, she turned quickly, slid into her car, and drove away. I stood there for a moment, the apples heavy in my hands. Once upon a time, she would have marched toward me with her chin high, ready to scold or sneer. Now she fled like a shadow at sunset. The town, meanwhile, embraced me more tightly than I expected. One evening, Walter Briggs stopped by with his wife. They brought a casserole, the kind with noodles and cheese that seemed to weigh a pound a spoonful. "We just want you to know," Walter said, "that what you did, it mattered. People talk about it at the diner, at the post office, even down by the docks. You showed all of us that it doesn't matter how old you are. You stand up, and people notice." "And of tech," his wife added. "You've become an example, Helen. A good one." I smiled politely, but inside, I felt a strange ache. I never set out to be an example. I set out to survive. Yet survival, it seemed, had inspired more than I knew. By October, the women's retreat at my house had welcomed its second group. Word spread through the nonprofit quickly. Women who needed rest, who needed proof they weren't forgotten, came with their bags and their stories. Each time they arrived, I thought of how different my house felt now. Once it had been invaded by trespassers, filled with the noise of those who mocked me. Now it was filled with quiet strength, with tears and laughter that healed instead of harmed. When the second group left, one of them pressed my hand and said, "You don't know it, but you saved me." Maybe I hadn't saved her. Maybe I had just given her a place to breathe. But maybe that was enough. And yet, in the quiet of my evenings, I still thought of Dan. I wondered if he sat at his kitchen table at night, head in his hands, blaming me for everything. I wondered if he told his children lies about me, or if he stayed silent, letting them grow up thinking their grandmother was the enemy. I wondered if he would ever understand. But then I remembered his letter, full of blame and bitterness. I remembered his silence when I asked him to defend me. I remembered his signature on the papers that said I was incompetent. And I knew understanding might never come. One Sunday after church, a young woman approached me. She looked to be about 30, with a toddler clinging to her skirt. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said shyly, "I just wanted to thank you. I lost my husband last year. I've been struggling, but when I heard what you did, how you stood up for yourself, how you turned your house into a refuge, it gave me hope. It made me believe I could get through too." I knelt a little to meet her son's eyes. He was wide-eyed, curious, innocent. "You will get through," I told her, "because strength isn't about never falling. It's about standing back up." Her eyes filled with tears. She hugged me quickly before walking away. I stood there, stunned. To think that my private war, my humiliation, had somehow become hope for others, it humbled me. That evening, I walked the beach alone. The waves lapped at the shore, steady and eternal. I thought about legacy, not the kind written in wills or measured in dollars, but the kind etched into the hearts of others. Dan and Marissa had tried to strip me of mine. They had wanted my house, my dignity, my very identity. But in fighting back, I had found something greater. I had found a community that believed in me. I had found women who looked to my house as a sanctuary. I had found strangers who whispered, "If she can survive, so can I." And maybe that was the true legacy. Not the house, not the money, but the strength to rise. I stood there until the sky turned purple and the first stars appeared. The sea whispered at my feet, constant, unyielding. And I whispered back, "You didn't break me. You made me stronger." It was a cold evening in November when Marissa returned. The sky was bruised with clouds, the wind sharp with the scent of the coming winter. I had just finished tidying the garden, pulling in the last of the potted plants before frost, when I heard the sound of tires crunching in my driveway. I looked up to see her car. Alone again. She stepped out slowly, wrapped in a coat too thin for the weather. Her face was drawn, her eyes hollow. For the first time, she looked less like the sharp, arrogant woman who had once laughed in my face and more like someone utterly lost. "Helen," she called softly, her breath rising in the chill air. "Please, can we talk?" I didn't move at first. A part of me wanted to walk inside, close the door, and leave her standing in the wind. But another part, the part of me that still remembered her bringing me flowers years ago, before all the poison hesitated. "Come in," I said finally. Inside, she sat at the kitchen table while I put on a kettle. She looked around the room, as though seeing it for the first time, her eyes lingering on the clean counters, the polished wood, the new china plates stacked neatly. "This house," she whispered. "It's beautiful again." "It always was," I replied. Her shoulders sagged. Dan won't speak to me. He blames me for everything. Says it was all my idea. He barely comes home anymore. I think, she swallowed hard. I think he's leaving us. Hastuo. The words should have stung, but instead they landed softly, like news I had expected all along. Dan had been leaving for years, leaving me, leaving himself, leaving the boy he once was. Marissa twisted her hands together. I don't know what to do. The bills keep piling up, the neighbors won't look me in the eye, and everywhere I go people whisper. I can't escape it. I thought, maybe you could help. I sat across from her, my tea untouched. Help? After everything you did? Her eyes filled with tears. I know. I was wrong. I was desperate, foolish, cruel. But I don't know how to fix it. You've always been strong, Helen. Stronger than anyone I know. Please, tell me what to do. For a long moment, I said nothing. I looked at her, the woman who had once mocked me as a parasite, who had stolen from me, who had turned my own son against me. And yet here she was, stripped of arrogance, trembling in my kitchen like a child. Finally, I spoke. Marissa, strength doesn't come from taking what isn't yours. It doesn't come from lies or schemes. It comes from facing the truth, no matter how painful. You want to know what to do? Start by admitting everything to yourself, to your children, even to Dan. Stop blaming others. Stop running. She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. And if it's too late? It's never too late to tell the truth, I said quietly. But it might be too late to save what you thought you had. Her sobs broke the silence, echoing through the house. For a moment, I almost reached out to comfort her, but I stopped myself. Compassion didn't mean forgetting. When she finally stood to leave, she looked at me with eyes red and swollen. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I wanted you to know I'm sorry. I nodded slowly. Then let your life show it. She left without another word, her car disappearing into the night. That evening, I sat alone on the porch, the wind whipping against my coat. I thought of Dan, of how he had chosen silence, blame, distance. I thought of Marissa broken, desperate, finally realizing the cost of betrayal. And I thought of myself. For so long, I had been defined by what others took from me, my husband, my peace, my dignity, nearly my home. But now I was defined by what I chose to give, strength, sanctuary, truth. Dan was fading from my life, like a shadow at dusk. Marissa had returned in desperation, but whether she would change was not mine to decide. What I knew was this: my house stood firm, my spirit stood firm, and no matter who came or went, I was no longer afraid of being alone. The sea roared in the distance, steady and eternal. I closed my eyes, breathed deep, and whispered into the cold November night. I am still here. Winter came early to Cape May that year. The air grew sharp, the sea restless, the sky low with gray clouds. I spent most of my days by the fire, a blanket over my knees, listening to the waves crash against the shore. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It carried the laughter of the women who had come to stay, the sound of their voices telling stories late into the night, the echo of healing in every room. My house had survived violation, betrayal, even attempted theft, and it had been reborn. I, too, had been reborn. Sometimes, I still thought of Dan. A mother never stops thinking of her child, no matter how old, no matter how far he strays. I thought of him at Christmas, wondered if he would call, wondered if his children would ask about me. But the phone stayed silent. At first, the silence hurt. Now, I let it be. Some wounds do not close, no matter how tightly you stitch them. And perhaps, I thought, some absences are a kind of mercy. As for Marissa, I never saw her again after that night in November. Maybe she listened to my words. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she found a way to stand. Or maybe she sank further into the shadows she had made for herself. That was no longer my battle to fight. What mattered was what remained. My house, my dignity, my independence, and the legacy I had chosen to leave. When I signed my will, I thought I was simply cutting Dan out, but now I see more clearly. I was opening a door for others. This house will not rot in greed or be sold to the highest bidder. It will stand for women who need refuge, for widows who need proof that they can still build, still live, still thrive. It will stand for strength. One evening, as the year drew to a close, I invited Walter and his wife over for dinner. After the plates were cleared, Walter raised his glass. "To Helen," he said, "the woman who reminded us all what courage looks like." I laughed, shaking my head. I didn't mean to be courageous. I just refused to let them take what was mine. His wife smiled gently. "That's what courage is." I thought about that long after they left. Maybe courage wasn't the absence of fear. Maybe it was simply the refusal to surrender. Now, as I sit here by the fire, I know the story is not just about betrayal. It is about resilience. They underestimated me. They thought I was just an old woman, easy to silence, easy to erase. But I was more than they imagined. I was the girl who once sewed late into the night to save every penny. I was the widow who built a house from nothing but willpower and bricks. I was the mother who stood alone and still raised a son. And though that son betrayed me, I did not break. I will not break. If anyone hears my story, I hope they remember this. Family is not just blood. Family is respect. Family is love. Family is the hand that lifts you, not the hand that takes from you. And when family fails, when betrayal comes from the very place you thought was safe, you must still stand. You must still protect what you've built. You must still remember who you are. Because in the end, dignity is worth more than inheritance. Independence is worth more than empty forgiveness. And truth, however painful, is worth more than silence. The fire crackles beside me. The sea roars beyond my windows. And I, Helen Whitaker, sit in the house I built, in the life I reclaimed, knowing this. They tried to erase me. Instead, I became unforgettable. And that is my legacy. What did you feel while listening to this story all the way through? If it touched your heart, leave the number 1 inch the comments. If you didn't feel connected to it, feel free to write 0. Every piece of feedback means a lot to me, because it's thanks to you that I can keep going. It's from your responses that I draw the energy to tell the next chapter a new story is coming, even deeper, even more moving. And I truly hope you'll be there to listen with me.